The first thing that I set about doing when building the habitat for the spotted hyena was to create a viewing gallery. Just like with the African wild dogs, I wanted this to be a fairly small area that allowed a bit of a private look into the lives of these animals. I believe with carnivores they deserve a little bit more privacy than the herbivores. I guess deserve is the wrong word, because of course the animals will deserve the same kind of treatment. But I feel like it is more necessary for carnivores to have that privacy, because in the wild they're always trying to be hidden and be able to sneak up on their prey and stuff. So you want to try and mimic that kind of behaviour as much as you can in this situation. So I'm creating a fairly small viewing gallery that is only going to be on one side of the habitat, which means that you get a nice intimate look into the enclosure whilst remaining fairly hidden from the animals. And to do that, I'm using some of the dry stone wall pieces from, I believe, the East Asia theme. We're using some simple 4x4 to start the middle piece, and then as you can see, I kind of created the wrong angle here. It's not quite as mirrored as I'd like it to be, but we use some of the large window frames to create two side panels, which we will then fill with glass. And once happy with the shape of the viewing gallery, it was a matter of placing our path down. And I'm using the same log rounds path that I've been using for the whole of the Africa section. And I'm making sure that we're not joining it to the existing paths, so that we can be very specific about where we want to place it. To activate this mode, you need to press in on the gamepad on your controller. That means that it won't automatically snap to the nearest path. You then turn it back on to join this path that you've created to the main path of your zoo. When it came to placing the barriers for this habitat, I decided to go for the steel mesh barrier. I haven't used this barrier before. I've only ever used the chain link ones in terms of the transparent barriers, aside from glass, obviously. So I thought I'd go for this because it's got quite an industrial look. It's going to be holding in carnivores, and I think it looks strong enough to do that. I'm not going to go too fancy. I want the inside of the habitat to be a bit of a focus on this one. I don't really want to distract from the main focus of this habitat, which is going to be the animals and the interior of the habitat. So I'm just keeping it really simple this time by using one of the pre-existing barriers from Frontier. And here's a little tip: if you can't reach the point you want to, just like here, it's not quite fitting exactly up against the barrier that we put in place earlier, what you can then do is edit the barrier and select this individual pole. Then by holding down triangle, or I believe it might be Y on an Xbox controller, you can manipulate that post and move it very precisely to where you want it to be, meaning that it doesn't have to be in the 1 meter intervals that would normally be when building a barrier. You can just slot it in wherever you need it to be. From there, I can switch over to the glass barrier and fill in these gaps. Then it's just a matter of adjusting the height to make sure that these windows are filled and that our guests can see into the habitat without the hyenas jumping out and savaging them. Next up, it's time to start building a water source. Now, if you've been following this channel for a little while now, you'll know that I always prefer to use a natural water source like a river or a pond rather than a water bowl or water pump. Of course, there are occasions that call for those specific kind of things. Like for the aardvarks, it was really useful to hide a water pump in amongst the rocks to really lean into that desert feeling. However, here I'm going for a natural water source, and I'm making sure that it's quite irregular in shape. So I'm carving out a general shape to begin with, and then using the flattened terrain tool, I can come back and sort of carve back into it, making it a lot more irregular. I end up playing about with this for quite a while, and it was going to be a fairly sizable pond, but I end up deciding to go for a really small one. Kind of something that does look like it is gathered after a rain more than anything, not necessarily a natural pond where animals are going to be living, something that occurs due to weather. And I do end up settling on that because I always go for quite large open water sources. I thought it'd be quite interesting to just mix it up and have something very different. For the hard shelter, I decided to go for something a little bit different, and that was to mimic the underpass of a bridge, using concrete panels and stuff to really create this kind of tunnel almost that our animals can sleep in. So to begin with, I used some 4 meter square pieces, the average building piece, and then at an angle I'm going to start to build out from there, and I will then swap to the triangular pieces to help slope down. I'm then going to try and manipulate the terrain around it to try and cover the edges and bridge over the top. This is quite a finicky process, and it took me a little bit of time going back and forth trying to get the exact right look. But when I was happy with it, it was time to move on and add some mulch to the top to try and bridge that gap, because after poking and pulling the terrain quite a lot, we ended up with a massive hole in the middle on the top, and that was caused due to placing the bedding. Once I placed the bedding, it kind of just erased some of the terrain that was above it, which was kind of annoying. So in order to mask that, we're going to pop down some 4-meter square pieces of mulch. That will just act as a fake bit of earth that we can then add loads of plants on top of and kind of blend the two together, making it look a lot more natural. The arrival of our first hyena meant that we could start to concentrate on the terrain distribution, and really, quite fortunately, they didn't want a lot of long grass. I have a strong disliking for the long grass. I think it just looks kind of crap in my opinion, so I like to get rid of as much of it as I can. Of course, anytime that a rubber duck is listed as an enrichment item, we need to have a rubber duck because they are amazing. After that, we could start to place a couple more of the enrichment items, but I didn't go overboard because I realised that I wanted to make sure all of the rocks that I wanted were in place first, so that I could properly inform my decisions about where the other things were going to go. So we're now going to hop over to placing some rocky outcrops, focusing around this hill so that it looks a bit more natural, like rocks are tumbling down and kind of coming out from the exposed ground. And we're also just going to have quite a large rocky outcrop up the other end of the tunnel as well. And once we're happy with the rocks, we can start to concentrate on the plant life. And at the top of our tunnel kind of hard shelter area that we've built, we want to focus on some bushes and stuff, things that are going to cover quite a large area pretty quickly so that we can help to blend the mulch into the ground that's up there and just make the transition that is at the moment quite messy look really smooth and natural. After that, we're going to place just a few trees and then a bunch more bushes and tall grasses and nettles and stuff, and just make this enclosure nice and bursting with life. Round the perimeter of the enclosure, as this is the edge of the zoo, we're going to start placing a bunch of native trees as well to just help blend it into the background. Not only will this help to suggest that the enclosure goes further back by kind of mimicking a forest behind it, but it's also just going to blend it into its surroundings quite nicely, because from above it doesn't look too great. That's a good little tip for if you are building a zoo and you want the habitats to stand out slightly less from a bird's eye view perspective. Start to place a bunch of trees around the edge and it will really help to blend it into the surroundings. You may also notice that I end up deleting quite a lot of things, and that's because I accidentally go over the coverage threshold for these animals, and that's a fairly easy fix. You just need to delete things, make sure that you've got smaller percentage of coverage in this habitat. But in order to make it look quite natural, I decided to really randomly select patches of grasses and make the grass look quite patchy rather than quite clumped together, as we created a kind of template that we copy and pasted around this habitat. Breaking it up makes it look a lot more natural, so it's a good way to decrease the coverage in this habitat whilst making it look fairly natural and organic. And once I was finished with all the plant life, I could start to place down all of the enrichment items that I hadn't done so before. Luckily, due to what these animals are, we have actually unlocked most of their enrichment items through either the wolves or the painted wolves. That's not what they're called in this game, the African wild dogs. Yeah, both of those species are very similar to this one, so therefore their enrichment items are largely the same, meaning we've got all of them unlocked already. As usual, I'm spacing them out quite a bit because we want the animals to kind of utilise their entire habitat. If they have no reason to go to an area in their habitat, they're not very likely to go there. So spacing out your enrichment items can really help with the movement of your animals. At the front of the habitat where our viewing gallery is, I'm also going to place down a donation bin and pop 2 education screens on the flat wall piece that we have available. I'm also going to pop down a couple benches and bins, and I'll come back to this area to add kind of a fence sort of thing to this path to help separate it from the main path a bit later. I want to decorate this area in a bit more detail later on. That won't be included in this video, so for now we are done. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this appearing in your subscription feed. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.